Welcome to the Online Hustle Podcast. In this episode, we're joined by Kimberly Mauser, an expert in business, environmental sustainability, and luxury packaging. Kimberly's extensive experience and knowledge will shed light on the ever-important topic of sustainability in the business world. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Online Hustle Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kimberly Mauser. Kimberly, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Piero. How are you?
I'm very, very good. Thank you for asking as well. And there's one particular reason why we obviously wanted you on this episode due to your experience. However, there's always one question I normally ask my guests. And the very first question is, if you were to meet someone new for the first time, how would you describe yourself and what you do?
I would describe myself as, well, first I would share my name. So I'm Kimberly, and I'm trying to save the planet because I love people.
Amazing. Great answer. Great answer. Is exactly what I wanted to hear. Simply because the very first question we're gonna ask, and I normally kind of take our listeners through our journey, and it starts with a little bit of background, a little bit of an introduction, and with the way you said it, how is it that you want to save the planet and save people?
Well, specifically, I'm an expert in sustainable packaging. So I want to help companies make more sustainable choices when it comes to the packaging that they use. If we're able to use less carbon-intensive packaging, we can help reduce the effects of climate change. So if we reduce the effects of climate change, we'll be able to help people live in a better planet for the future.
Amazing answer. Thank you so much. And I want to start with a little bit personal. How and why did this kind of love for, sustainable packaging start from?
Well, I'd say it's an accumulation of my life, I'd say. There are three particular themes that come to mind when I think about what led me to my current career path. The first one is I'm from Alaska. Wow. And growing up in Alaska, as you can imagine, it is very special in itself. It's very natural. There's forests and mountains everywhere, particularly where I grew up. But what's most striking about my childhood is the warmest it ever got was 21 degrees. I remember that feeling very warm. Now, in the summertime, it can get upwards to 30 degrees, 35 degrees in worst case scenario, right? I mean, you're in the UK. I think you also experience now
it's very different. It's very different nowadays. Yeah, you do get really hot summers. We didn't this year. It was a very rainy summer. But last year we generally had a drought for the first time in so long. So absolutely, it's facts, right? It's right there on paper as well. It shows there is a massive change. Out of curiosity, when was the last time you actually been to Alaska?
Well, 2 years ago.
Okay, amazing. I'm guessing it was different to when you used to live there.
Absolutely. Usually I go for Christmas, but of course my parents who lived in Alaska, they would tell me how warm it's getting, how air conditioners are flying off the shelves, which is really unusual because I did not grow up in that environment. But when I did go back home for Christmas, probably about 6 years ago, this was probably the first memory I have of thinking, oh my gosh, climate change is a serious and very real thing. I went back for Christmas, and of course we usually go skiing. There was no snow. There was no snow in Alaska on December 25th, and not even a sprinkle of snow. I could still count every blade of grass, dead grass on my parents' yard. So that was the first real experience I had being confronted with climate change.
That's I think that's a very on-hand experience, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm obviously going to move towards the business side of things and
Sure.
because there's a whole conversation. It's something that I've stressed as well in one of the other episodes that I've spoken about sourcing packaging as well. I think I speak a lot about the brand awareness side of things, but obviously for businesses, it's really important, not just on a brand awareness thing, but obviously for the planet side of things.
Mm-mm.
On our second basis, also understanding that it doesn't affect your profitability that much, right? It's something that I think means more than it actually means for a business profitability, because it's something that I speak about on a daily basis. However, what do you think are the most important environmental issues that are affecting companies today?
Right. Speaking more to the luxury industry, because that's really my expertise, though I imagine some of this will be transferable to other industries. When we think of luxury, we think of rare, it's precious, it's not so common. So materials like leather, precious metals, or exotic plants are commonly found in the luxury industry. Or rather, they're commonly used in the luxury industry. And all of these materials contribute to climate change. They're also highly vulnerable to supply disruption because of climate change. And I'll give you an example, Piero. For example, perfume. Perfume brands who are using essential oils, which means they're extracted from plants, are increasingly concerned with the drought, which you spoke of earlier, floods that are happening, because that's impacting not only the yield, so the total amount of plants which they're able to extract, but also the quality of the plants they're able to use, as well as the cost of the extraction of these flowers. So it's becoming a business imperative, finding solutions to deal with climate change, or to improve the effects of climate change even. This scarcity of resources is really a call to action, because it's having an effect on a company's and brand's profitability. And I would say that's, as somebody who works in sustainability, it's really key to figure how and why sustainability is imperative for the business, in addition to understanding why it's important for the people who work in that business. But really, from a concrete profitability perspective, climate change has its impacts on profitability, because sometimes those raw materials which are used will simply not be available anymore. So it's really important that brands are finding alternatives, protecting sensitive supply chains, and also contributing to the reduction of climate change impact. Another issue that I really want to talk about is the fact that this is a big issue for Gen Z. Climate change, sustainability, inclusion and diversity, which all fall under the ESG umbrella, ESG standing for environmental, social, and governance. That's an acronym we use a lot in sustainability, because that covers the impacts of climate change, truly. This is really important for Gen Z. Sorry, did you want to say something?
No, not at all. Please keep going. I think that's a really good point, yeah.
So we talked about how the supply of some of these raw materials are impacted by climate change, and how companies need to adjust to that. Also, the sales of their products are highly impacted by their sustainable messaging. There's a great study that McKinsey had done, and that's 40% of millennials and Gen Z, they're willing to pay up to 10% more for a sustainable product. 40% of millennials and Gen Z. With that said, Gen Z, more than the millennials, they're highly sensitive to sustainability messaging. And what I mean by that is Gen Z is that generation who is really connected to the internet. They can access information really quickly. So greenwashing is something that companies want to avoid. And when they are communicating their sustainability messages, it's really important that those are backed by facts, data. Transparency is incredibly important when communicating sustainable messaging, particularly for Gen Z. So I would say those are the two biggest environmental issues for luxury brands. It's ensuring that they are doing something to protect their sensitive supply chains for their materials that they use, but as well, they're communicating and doing the work and using data to show that they're doing the work. So that way they're able to really address some of the major concerns, particularly for Gen Z.
That's an amazing rundown. I completely agree. It agrees to the point that I made initially about, for our business brand awareness as well. I think it makes a massive difference. Letting your customers and basically make them view the fact that, with a fact-checked background, saying actually this is how we believe on the sustainability of our company. And what you said about they're willing to, Gen Z are willing to spend 10% more. I think it's fully backed up, and I think it's very factual, and I think it will make a massive difference towards companies. From then on, I kind of wanted to speak about what we call EPR and extended producer responsibility, and I think that's a massive movement from governing bodies towards the push towards sustainable products. And as you're in sustainable packaging, packaging is the very first category that Germany and France introduced in Europe. It's something that the business that I speak to kind of had to wrap their head around, but it actively promotes you rethinking about your packaging and your product, because basically, very straightforward, the heavier and more your packaging, your product is made with these types of materials, certain type of materials, the more you have to pay a tax at the end of each annual year to each government. And it started in Germany and France. It is being launched widely in the European Union, and I can see that being replicated in many countries in the world. Currently, Spain and Austria are launching their own programs. The UK will be part of it very shortly, I'm sure as well. What do you see, and why do you think the government bodies are trying to make that movement as well?
I think it's a combination of forces. When we look at sustainability, policy plays an important part. People like ourselves, individuals, play an important part as activists, demanding change and holding accountable companies or organizations. So I think those three are really the pillar of making any sustainable change. It's people, policy, and companies. And I think to call on a statistic from Pew Research Center, there's a statistic that 67% of American adults believe that big companies, are doing too little to reduce the impact of climate change. So what I think is interesting about what the EU is doing in terms of policy in relation to the EPR is they're holding companies accountable. And I think that's, as an individual, as a consumer myself, there's only so much that we can do. In the end, we really do need to hold companies accountable for the emissions that they have. And in fact, that's truly the heart of what EPR it is, following this principle of the polluter pays. If a company is going to produce this sports energy drink, then they also need to be responsible for what's done after it's been consumed. And that's what I think is moving us into this more circular economy thinking and stepping away from this classic linear economy that we're very used to. So I think that this EPR and what the EU policy EPR is doing is really following this new logic that we have. And I think it's really being encouraged by people and individuals like ourselves.
Amazing. Completely agreed. Is there any other, because obviously I'm very basic, and it's something that I obviously advise clients on. It's a regulation that our clients need to be able to even sell on e-commerce factory. That is actually a requirement. So most marketplaces will actually demand that you have EPR numbers, and they almost work like a VAT and tax code, right?
Sure.
So
exactly.
are there any other regulations that you see in the world that is going towards that trend towards sustainability?
I think actually in the UK, in terms of countries to really implement some sort of tax or some sort of regulation on packaging, has done a really good job. I think it was about 3 years ago that they implemented the plastic waste tax where you need to use recycled content in your packaging, and it needs to be a certain percentage based on the total weight. And that's taking it a step further than policy. The EPR is really, it's a policy, which is a recommendation that companies need to follow. And that's, of course, going to be delineated depending on which country it's operating in. So each country is responsible for developing what EPR schemes should look like and what the consequences of not having one are, whereas the UK set up a tax. So if a product does not have X% of recycled plastic content, that company will be fined. So I think that's an important distinction, is that the EPR is really an EU policy which each country will manage the consequences of not having an APR scheme, whereas the UK took a step further and said, we're actually going to tax brands and companies for not following this recycled content law. So I think actually the UK is, in terms of entire countries, to create some sort of policy / tax is really doing a great job. And I think more countries will start to follow this scheme that they have.
Yeah, amazing. The UK does love taxes, so it doesn't surprise me. But at the same time, it is very positive. I think it's something that a lot of businesses need, and they need that guidance. Is what you said about 67% of Americans believe that the big companies are not doing enough. I think that's something that does change when governments come with these rules, and actually same rules for everybody. It's not just for anyone. It's for everyone. You must adhere to it. So I'm all about strategies, right? And I'm a strategy and growth account manager here at Ask. And what I want to understand is, we understand the problem. I'm always about the solution, understanding what the possible solution is to the problem that companies have. So in terms of strategies, even on a luxury brand basis, from your own background, what are some of the common practices and that companies can start taking towards thinking about that sustainability side of things?
Again, going back to what defines luxury, and that's truly what is uncommon, what is rare, what is precious. And the production of these luxury items have really been put under a microscope this past decade. So luxury brands are being held accountable by consumers for how they are sourcing and how they are producing these luxury good items. I think it behooves luxury brands and companies to really create more transparency in their supply chain. And that's to ensure they're sourcing their materials in a socially and environmentally responsible way. This is truly the bare minimum. So as a luxury brand, if you're a small brand, and you were to ask yourself, where can we be really investing our resources to make a more sustainable brand? I think it's really looking into your supply chain and working with your suppliers and your producers to ensure that socially and environmentally what they're doing is sustainable.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So can you kind of give us an example of our company, kind of implementing these sort of ideas?
Yeah, this was not from the luxury sector, but I think this company really from the beginning has embedded responsible sourcing at the heart of their company, and that's IKEA. It's not something that we often think of when we shop at IKEA. We often think affordable furniture that we get when we're first starting off. But actually, IKEA has an incredible supplier policy in how they develop the suppliers, how they invest in suppliers. The whole process that they follow ensures that their supply chain is indeed following environmentally and socially responsible practices. And I really admire that because IKEA is a global company. They're a massive company and they're a furniture company. And when we think about affordable products, we often are concerned that affordable nature is sacrificing on what is socially and environmentally sustainable. But what's really great about IKEA is that they're environmentally and socially responsible, and their products are also very affordable. So I think for companies to draw inspiration from how they can do things differently in their supply chain, I think looking to IKEA is a really good way to do that.
Absolutely. It's something that I've spoken about before as well, about kind of being able to reduce your carbon footprint in terms of sourcing materials as well. It's like a massive part of your environmental sort of journey and creating a product. I think it's easy to create something that's an environmentally friendly product, but not thinking about your carbon footprint at all. It has to be a full journey and a full picture.
Oh yeah, I agree with you, Piero. I think the other element of IKEA's model is their logistics. I mean, the whole fact that they are flat, all of the design is so that it can be broken down and packaged flat, so that way it fills the containers perfectly. I mean, that's another part about the sustainable journey that IKEA has taken. And I think logistics, to what you're speaking to, plays an important part to the carbon footprint. So when we're looking at a single product like this mouse here, for example, it's important to take into consideration the design, the materials, but also how are we shipping it? The LCA, so looking at the whole life cycle analysis from where the material sourced, how are we designing it, what happens to it when it's done being used, that all needs to be taken into account when we calculate carbon emissions.
Amazing. And the next step I kind of wanted to take is the fact that I feel like, businesses are run by individuals, and I feel like businesses will have their own opinions about it. And I think one main myth that a lot of businesses have is that changing packaging and changing and thinking about sustainability is hard. And I wanted this episode to kind of be like a Mythbusters type episode where we could say, actually, it's all about willingness and kind of make them understand about the rewards. As we already said, the brand awareness behind it, what you said about Gen Z as well, being able to, willing to spend more for the product. And similarly, when you were talking about us as consumers, we can't really necessarily take the blame because we have to buy what's, most economical or that suits us the best. If that isn't an environmentally friendly product, it's not necessarily down to the consumer, but whoever's selling it. So on a myth busting type of case, how do you think a company can start, or some of the issues that a company can start encountering when going towards a sustainable sort of company image?
I think, well, to take it really from the perspective of my experience, and that's as a sustainable packaging expert in helping brands transition into more sustainable packaging. I think oftentimes companies and brands feel like they have to do a complete overhaul of everything that they've ever done, and it's this impossible behemoth of a task to take because who are the experts? How are we going to do this? It's requiring so many resources, and you just get this sort of overwhelmed feeling that everything we've done is wrong and you have to completely change everything. And it goes to say with my favorite proverb, and that's, how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant piece by piece. So companies looking into transitioning into sustainable packaging, it's really important to build your strategy and your roadmap to get there. One, it's important that as a company, we do it piece by piece because there's always going to be learnings. And if you do something all at once, then there's bound to be something that goes wrong and it's just so much effort. So it's really important to take it piece by piece, develop your strategy around it when going into something, to a more sustainable business model. Specifically with sustainable packaging, it also has to be done piece by piece because not all packaging materials have, for example, recycled equivalents. Some plastics, for example, don't have a recycled equivalent. So over time, specifically now, there's this incredible boom in technology in developing material alternatives or recycled versions. I mean, the technology in recycling is really, it excites me, and I'm very excited about the recycling of plastic in the future, which will help us be able to make those transitions from virgin plastic to recycled plastic. But in the end, companies, they do need to have this step-by-step plan because not all of the materials are readily available right now. And a lot of that technology needs to ramp up. A lot of the availability of these materials is also still very limited. So we do need to develop a plan, and it needs to go with the availability of these materials. So I think very practically, every company, in order to start their sustainable journey, it's really to look at their big picture and then figure out where they want to go and then address how they can get there step by step. And being transparent in that journey. So being aware that this is that famous word journey. It is a journey. It is a 10, 15, 20-year journey for some companies, is important. And also realizing that the industry and the world is also on that same path. So being patient and being aware of the fact that technologies are ramping up to be able to provide on that journey. So it's companies as well as what's available for them to use in their sustainability strategies. Those are two really important factors to take into consideration.
That's perfect. I really appreciate what you say about the technology because one question I'm going to ask you about in a second is kind of understanding what are the examples. Let's give our listeners like practical examples of what type of products are out there. But there's one particular product that I've seen before from a friend of mine has kind of showed me. It's different polymers where it almost seems like plastics, but when they do get disposed of, and if they do end up in the ocean, they actually, first of all, dissolves, and secondly, doesn't release any toxic sort of materials to, the environment that it's in the water as well. That eventually, if you're, have, seafood and fish in your diet, you end up consuming yourself anyway. So it's very important, and these type of products are available. I appreciate what you're saying about the technology. So what are the other types of packaging products that are out there, and what can companies start thinking about in terms of the type of products they can use?
Yeah. I think, so I'm going to plug in that I think that plastic is an important part of our sustainable future.
Yeah.
Plastic became really, really popular versus paper in the 90s because of this massive social movement to save the trees, right? To save the trees, we started using plastic, and now it's save the oceans because we have too much plastic. And I think society, we tend to enjoy having a one size or one solution fits all. And that's just not part of the sustainable future. We need a little bit of everything to enable a sustainable future, to ensure that we're reducing our carbon emissions. So there's technological development on all fronts, on paper solutions. Can we develop paper which is more resistant to liquid, for example? Are there instances? So, for example, during the pandemic, we saw an increase of consumption of single-use packaging. So wet wipes, for example. Yeah. We use more wet wipes to reduce from cross-contamination. We saw more things that were packaged for one-time use. So those packets are often not recyclable and not very good for the environment because they just end up in landfill, right? So paper and chemical companies working together to develop solutions which are paper-based and are either biodegradable or recyclable, for example, on single-use packets. Those are some really exciting technologies happening in that space. How do we make glass more resilient? How do we make glass less breakable is another important aspect, because glass in itself is such a energy-intensive material. If you think about how much heat it takes to create glass, or even the raw materials required to make glass, it's a very energy-intensive material. How can we use less glass and still get the same resistance or resilience to breakage? For example, companies working on the technology to develop that. Plastics, which is my passion and my expertise. How can we take plastic, which is existing in the world? How can we take the plastic from the oceans and make that usable again? And because I'm more of an expert on plastic, I'll speak to that part. Plastic in itself is derived from fossil fuels, and the creation of is what we call virgin plastic, meaning it's being derived from petroleum oil, is an incredibly carbon-intensive process. And the technologies we see coming out now are, rather than using petroleum oil, which is it's a finite resource and it's incredibly energy-intensive, how can we use other types of oils or sources to create what we see as a consumer as plastic? So there's a lot of research and technology being developed into taking out this part, which is digging up oil from the ground and finding alternative sources to use instead. There's a really exciting project that SABIC chemical companies. It's actually the EU-based petroleum company, where they are creating plastic from plastic that they are sourcing from the ocean. And what's impressive about their technology is that oftentimes when you think about, oh gosh, plastic coming from the ocean, so it probably has a smell, maybe it has contaminants in it. If you've seen plastic in the ocean, you can imagine what that might be like. What's impressive about their technology is that they're able to break down this waste plastic, so nets, bottles, trash that you find in the ocean. They're able to break all of that down to its molecular form and build it back up as virgin plastic. So manufacturers, those who are making sports drinks, for example, they can use this plastic again, just as they would plastic coming from petroleum sources. And that's called chemical recycling. So chemical recycling plays a really important part in our sustainable future because it's helping get rid of and clean up that plastic waste that we see.
No,
I
that's
went on a bit
great.
of a tangent.
No,
I'm
no, it's really great because
passionate about that.
no. Look, it's really, really great because it's what I wanted to kind of talk about. It's obviously whilst it's easy for us to talk about the issue there is, but as I already said, I always want to give solutions, and it requires a little bit of research, but there has to be solutions to what the issue currently is. So, and my next bit was always going to be about this is the current solution, this is the background. Now, how do you see the future going, and how can business really adopt this, not just as an option for the planet itself, but actually as a competitive advantage as well. As I've already said, us as consumers, I think we believe we want a more environmentally friendly product, but sometimes it's not necessarily out there, right?
Yes.
So how do you see that one affecting our future and the future of consumerism and then also products? But at the same time, the future that we believe in, where do we see that sustainable packaging sort of go towards? What is the trend going towards?
Well, in sustainability, and somebody who works in sustainable packaging, of course, one of the pillars is to look for alternative materials. What is a material which is less carbon intensive? So recycled plastics, looking at alternative fibers to wood, for example. But first and foremost, we look at sustainable design and the circularity of products. Do we even need this product? For example, is there a way to reuse a product? Is that possible? I think what you're talking about is sort of the shift away from what we spoke about earlier, and that's really the linear economy. We're shifting away from that. We're shifting more to circular design, circular economy, which is trying to keep the resources that we use in our economy for as long as possible. So it's no longer this take, make, and dispose linearity that we're talking about anymore. We as an entire globe are looking into how can we keep the materials that we are producing and using for as long as possible. So I think circular design, circular economy, people can really educate themselves on this topic to prepare for the future. And I think that's, even as consumers, as things become more expensive, we're going to try to get the most out of the products that we have, right? So me, for example, this year I've really challenged myself not to create any food waste, which means I have to eat everything that's in my fridge and in my pantry. So I've gotten really creative with how to use what I have available to myself. And I think it's a very basic example of this, but I think it can be scaled up to what companies are thinking of in terms of their products as well. So to answer your question really concretely, I think it's about stepping away from this linear model and really embracing the circular economy. Do we even need this product? If we don't need this product, how can we improve the consumer experience of this product? Maybe it's not even about owning this product anymore. Maybe there's a lease or a service we can offer for these products instead. So really shifting away from linear to circular, I think, is a way that companies can start to really motivate themselves to do business in a more sustainable way.
I think that's perfectly said. I think it's the very first question, asking yourself, instead of just changing what is already out there, what is the purpose of this product? And if it's, thoroughly useful, how can we change it for the better? It's the type of question that you're asking yourself instead of, I'll just change it what's already out there. I think that's a really, really good point. I want to go back to more of a personal type of question and kind of understand more on if there's anything that you're seeing in the future and any particular event, basically asking for your own advice and your own opinion. Do you think there is one particular event or anything that's about to change that's really going to affect what we do?
That's a big question, Piero. There's a really startling study that I think about probably on a daily basis. And that's by 2030, which is almost 6 years from now, we will need 2 planet Earths to feed everybody. There are no 2 planet Earths. Our population continues to increase. So essentially, people will starve. At the end of the day, and this is something that a friend in Forest Conservancy had said to me, at the end of the day, the planet will be fine. The planet we might have more deserts, we might have areas more flooded with water. The planet will be totally fine if we do nothing. But we will suffer. People will suffer. And I think that as we think about the future and what do we need to do about this, I think that's really what's important to keep in our minds. And that's something that I think about daily because I care so much about people and I care about the next generation who's coming after me. I want them to be able to have the beautiful experiences that I've had of walking in the woods, going to the ocean, swimming in the lake, and having this leisure time in nature and having a snack after school. Those are some really basic things that people won't have by 2030, and already we see people having less and less of. So when I think about the future, I often think about that study about 2030 and the fact that we'll need 2 planet Earths. And that really motivates me personally on how I operate and how I consume as well. And I think when we look at the future and we think about what we need to do from a sustainability perspective, I think what's just important is that companies and people connect back to why is that important for them? Why is sustainability important for them? And I think the challenge we have currently with sustainability is that people are a bit tired of the evangelical message of sustainability and saving the planet. And we have to find a way to redo this messaging and really remind people that actually this is for people. This is not for companies. This is not for profit. This is not for politicians. This is really for people. So finding your love for people or the people in your lives or the young people that you know, I think it's about when we look to the future, we need to think about the people who will be living this future. And if we can connect to that message and we can really connect to that sense of purpose, I think that really drives some of the decisions that we make. Now, that was very heartfelt, Piero.
Yeah.
More concretely, if you want to think about a hard business perspective, it's actually about people again. I think Gen Z, I'm so excited about this generation and their spending habits and what they believe is important. They're calling it the activist generation. They care. They really care. And they are the first to call companies out when there's any sense of greenwashing. That they're first to call companies out if their packages come, like if this mouse were to come in a package just like this big, which we've seen, they won't stand for it. So I think for companies to stay relevant, it's important that they are staying in tune with Gen Z and they're being really transparent and honest on their sustainability journey. I think for business to thrive, sustainability is going to be an important metric for them.
And yeah, well, the only thing I wanted to really add to that is it kind of shows the power of the individual, where I feel like, a lot of people saying you making those small changes doesn't really affect the world, but it's a small step, right? It does make a difference. And I think that was a really important thing that you said. And I really appreciate your time as well. So I'm going to go into asking you, Kimberly, the consultant, a couple of final questions, which are really important. First of all, what is one main point that you would give about company sustainability to any of our listeners, any of them running a business or planning or starting a sustainable business?
I think it's whatever business you decide to do will be a sustainable business. And I think that's we as the listeners out there, may they be companies or may they be individuals who have day jobs. I think every business is going to be a sustainable business and every job will be a sustainability job. Again, I think if anything to help create security for yourself, it's acknowledging that we are shifting away from this linear economy. We're shifting into a circular economy, whether that be for the environment or not. And one piece of advice would really be to look into how you can create your business to be a more circular business, because I do believe that's going to speak more to your consumers, and that's also going to help profitability in the end, because that's the general direction of where we're headed.
Amazing. And how about, with your own expertise about luxury brands, what is one tip that you would give a luxury brand in changing not just packaging, but in general their products?
Mm-hmm. There's a statistic out there. I think it's between 60 and 80% of a product's carbon footprint comes from the design phase, which means as these creatives are developing their products, it's at this point that sustainability already needs to be on the table. So I think what luxury brands can do is help educate their teams on sustainability. And what I mean by that is first connect, why is it important? Again, I think the most important thing a company can do is really create that sense of purpose for people of why sustainability is important and what we're doing this for. And then educating them on what is an LCA. So the life cycle analysis, what we talked about, that's taken into consideration when we want to know the carbon footprint of something. What type of materials are out there? What are alternatives they can be using? Getting them curious about that and versus the challenges of using new materials. What is the excitement about using these materials? And wow, what kind of communication can we do about this new material, which reduces our carbon footprint by 10% by using it, for example? So I think luxury brands, what's really important is that they are educating their design teams, educating their marketing teams and communication teams on what we can do differently to make a more sustainable product. I think that's really important because, again, I think it's between 60 and 80% of the carbon emissions or the carbon footprint of a product is decided at design phase.
It's amazing. And I completely agree because I've been through that process and you have to think about it. You have to think about it straight away. It's not something that you can offset, let's launch first and then we'll change. It's something that you want to do straight away. It's something that I was taught about it especially when, let's say, for example, sourcing products in China, as much as you have one point of contact, if you're creating a product, you really need to understand where each raw material of your products are coming from. And there's a delivery from each manufacturer, each raw material. So you want to reduce that as much as possible and centralize that everything as much as possible because it helps the environment in the long term. So I think that's really
to add to what you're saying, actually. Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I sometimes get so caught up in I can be very, sustainability is very near and dear to my heart, but I think what you mentioned is a critical business point, and it reminds me of this matrix that I've seen about the consequences for a business of not using sustainability upfront in design, and that's if you don't think of it upfront, the costs of trying to rework something and make it sustainable. So what you're speaking to about, oh my gosh, now we have to source this from here, here, and there, and then the timing condensed. It actually ends up being more expensive if you put it into the tail end of our project than if you were to put it into the development of the product. So from a business perspective, it is way more cost efficient. Studies have proven it is way more cost efficient to develop sustainably versus to put it back into the product as an afterthought. I think great point. I'm so glad you made it.
And yeah, sorry, just I want to make one final point just to add to that. I speak about profitability a lot with my clients, and every client thinks that our costs are too high because of the deliveries from Amazon, or our fulfillment cost is too high, or our price is too low. Our competitors are undercutting us. But actually, essentially, there's one final point. Actually, have you ever thought about reducing the cost of your product by centralizing everything? Because guess what? Your manufacturers are charging you a premium to, source a particular product from somewhere else. So it's understanding how to centralize those products and spending that effort as you said, in the design stage on how to source the product as sustainable as possible. I really appreciate that you backed my idea up as well. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I think if not in the actual product, supply chain is a hidden gold mine of savings that can be made through sustainability initiatives, for sure.
Perfect. Cool. I will go into our final section then. It always comes a little bit of a surprise, but because the question, the way it's worded, I feel like I've spoken to so many of guests, and this is the one question that kind of throws people off, simply because this final section, I call it Believe It or Not. Okay, so believe it or not, the year 2013 was now 10 years ago. Kimberly might just show our age, but feels like 2013 feels like yesterday. But yeah, and it's been 10 years, right?
Yes.
If there's one piece of advice, and I've obviously included you've just sent us a picture of you from 10 years ago. By the way, you have not aged 1 second, which is crazy to see. But if there's one piece of advice that you would give yourself in the year 2013, what would that be? And that advice cannot be investing in crypto, because that's a cheat code. See, that's the part that stumps our guest.
Okay. Well, let me think on it then. I think it would be to continue being reckless. I think that's what it would be, because I think people will be able to see from the photo at some point I started taking myself a little too seriously. And I think what we need more now is, as a society or people, I'm taking a note from Gen Z, okay? Like, let's be activists. Let's be more, if we see something, we say something. And I think 10 years ago, I was really on that cusp of adulthood, if you will, of continuing to be myself, questioning things that don't make sense to me. So that sense of recklessness to, okay, now we are in a society of adults and adults do these things. And I would tell myself, because now I'm going back into this phase of questioning things, I would tell myself to continue to be reckless. In that sense.
That's very different from the answer. I appreciate that. It's very honest. I really, really appreciate that. That's great. Final thing. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for your time. Final thing is, anyone listening to this podcast, how can they get in touch with you and kind of grab your advice on kind of making their business sustainable?
Thanks, Piero, for asking. You can reach out to me via www.kmsconsulting.ch. That's my personal website where you can see what I've done. You can see the projects that I've been working on and get in contact with me.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much again. Thank you for coming in on this episode as well.
Really fun.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Online Hustle Podcast. We hope you found the conversation insightful and inspiring. If you'd like to connect with our guests or learn more about their work, you can find their contact details in the episode description below. Stay in the loop with us, following us at the Online Hustle Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. And remember, if you're looking for an expert guidance on e-commerce or have questions for our strategy and growth team, you can reach out to us via our website at strategy.avarsgroup.com or drop us a simple email at strategy@avarsgroup.com. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes where we continue to unravel the strategies that drive online success.